Tonight's topic is on the social media and its effects on our relationships. I thought we'd look at relationships first and look at how relationships form and what our needs are in relating, and then look at social media and see how it fits in or doesn't fit in with those needs and what its own needs are and how it assists or detracts from our patterns of relating. Is that okay? What would you constitute as needs of a friendship? And a friendship is a particular kind of relationship because ostensibly a friendship doesn't have a function. It's simply a pure friend is not there for what they can get from you or give you, or it's not a need, it's not part of a function. They're just with you and you with them because you enjoy being together. They're not your dad because you've got to be your dad or your doctor or the neighbor or the guy who owns a dog, or it's just a friend. And so in a sense it's a special kind of relationship because it's simply there for you and for the other. And so in looking at that, what would you like to find in a friendship? What do relationships need? If you bring it down to basics. For your body you need food, you need rest, you need cleanliness, and so you know how to manage that. What do you need in a relationship? Trust. Yeah. Huh? Safety, yeah. Yeah. Someone who gets me. Oh, there's a sort of connection, isn't there?
Some level of mutual enjoyment.
Yeah.
Of hanging out together.
Yeah.
Like a non-judgmental and accepting.
Yeah. Okay, so it needs time. You need to actually have some.
And then Carla's one of freedom.
Oh. Not function.
It's going to sound weird, but
I put a quality of presence. You know, if somebody's sort of not there half the time, you actually, that emotional availability, that sort of interest availability, I suppose that's part of getting you. You know, how present am I at any one point in time? And what is distracting me? I notice sometimes when I'm looking at somebody, then my eyes move away from them, and because something else comes to mind, and I can't do it if I'm looking at their eyes. But then they notice I'm looking away, so they feel like I'm being distracted, so they wonder if I'm really there or not there. So that quality of totally being there for the other, not even for myself, because there's a difference between holding the space on your side and moving to their side of the space, and just being fully receptive. In a sense, I think friendships, a lot of importance comes out of friendship when we can explore a new feeling with somebody. Like we'll tell them some bad news and they'll say, really? And you say, yeah, and you struggle with it, but you're saying it and you wouldn't say it to anybody else. You know, it's almost like with them you're actually going into a new space and they're almost like giving you that space to do that. And they're enabling you to move into a new emotional space. That's what I mean, emotional availability. If somebody, if you tell them a difficult thing and they can't cope with that feeling, they'll usually distract you. Oh no, it's fine. I'm sure it'll be okay. Well, you know, what happened to your dog? You know, they change the subject, or they'll distract you because they don't want to actually get the weight of that feeling. But when they can be there and say, really, you know, and how did you know? And you feel you can actually express difficult feelings, not easy ones, the difficult ones. You're actually exploring and going deeper, but you know, in turn you would give them that space, because when you share that sort of level of friendship, that's what you do for each other. And in a sense you allow each other to grow bigger, to grow broader emotionally. Empathy is feeling their feelings. Compassion is feeling their pain. And when they do that to you, there's a good connection, and you go away feeling understood. When somebody gets a feeling, I mean, this thing of getting me, when somebody can receive a feeling, they get you, or you feel that someone gets you, and that's vital. We were doing a men's weekend, Carlo and I, this weekend, and some guys were asking about being with their sons and children, and there's a lot of a need to be emotionally available to children. Fathers often tend to think, and probably mothers too, but that quality time is when I don't do nothing else. I just play cricket or take them out for an ice cream, or we do something together. And that's really only about a quarter of the story. Quality time is when I'm emotionally present to them, because then they can actually fill their own space. Because when you're doing an activity together, sure, it's nice, and there's a conviviality, and there's a bonding, but there's not necessarily a self-revealing. And what often happens is dads hide their own pain and their struggle, and they just want to go out on the Saturday afternoon and watch the kids play cricket or something, and they're on their best behavior, but they don't express their pain and their struggle. Not that you overload the child with that stuff, but you need to help the child to move into that space, because in so doing, you're actually helping the child to become more developed emotionally. And it's a vital need, and I think in friendships we do a lot of that without realizing it. Because something happens, you want to tell somebody. Who do you tell? You phone a friend. You know what happened, and you might not tell anybody else, but you need somebody to tell. I remember when I was 21, I went overseas by myself. That was the hardest thing, because there was nobody to share anything with. You see something beautiful, you look around to look for somebody to tell. Look there, isn't that wonderful? Take a picture with me, And you by yourself and think, oh, okay. It really is very disappointing. That shared experience, increases it profoundly. Yeah. I think when an emotion is pressing, because the concern that it brings has a sense of urgency, it pushes its importance level above other issues. So if you're worried about your class's average mark, and a parent comes and says, my child, is having a fight with the other child, and it seems almost like trivial in comparison, and so this feeling is going to dominate. And I think to be in that space, you need to resolve this feeling and come to terms with it, so that you can come here and then be clear emotionally. It's about getting the stuff out of the basket so you have space in the basket for the other situation. Well, most people aren't emotionally developed. In some areas the emotions are well developed, in others the areas are still stunted. The emotions are stunted and not developed. And so anyone who goes near there causes a lot of anxiety or discomfort. Sit in a waiting room, in a dentist's waiting room, and a child starts crying, and half the people start saying, shut that child up. They can't take it, they don't like it. Whereas the other ones want to go and hug the child. Different responses depending on what you're carrying. Well, I mean, and the downside is they can say it's trivial because they've not had a problem with that feeling, whereas for you it might be an issue, but then because they dismiss it, it might actually cause you confusion because it's big for you, but now that's why people say, I'm sorry, this is a stupid question, because they anticipate that others think it's unimportant or irrelevant, and so they're already putting they're defending themselves against that possibility already. Whereas every question is good. There are only stupid answers, stupid questions. But if you take a person's feeling seriously and take it very seriously, it's almost like you enable them or give them the ability to move into the feeling fully, feeling that they're taken seriously and that they can explore the feeling. And when they have felt the feeling will translate and change and move on to the next feeling, and then they feel understood, and in fact they are healed in a way. Feelings don't change us because we don't feel them. We just fight them, we keep them away. We don't actually want to get them, let them in, and so we wrestle with them. We don't want to admit them. Whereas when you feel a feeling, when you grieve, when you laugh, when you cry, when you feel the anxiety, and then pass it through, it shifts and it becomes a new feeling. And that's the healing process. So I thought I'd just lay down some of these basic needs in a relationship, and then look at the social media and just ask ourselves, it's a bit like you go to one shop and you buy things that you need for food, and then you go to another shop, a different kind of shop, and now you want to buy some products, and it happens to be a Japanese grocery store or Chinese, and you don't know what half the things are, and you want to make supper and you look at these things, you don't know what they are. So maybe that's not a good analogy, but so how does social media, so this is relational needs. Can we do trust on social media? Yeah, one thing we didn't write here is that it's personal, it's unique. It's you're Nathan, you're Elizabeth. Social media tends to generalize and depersonalize. We tend to see people more as categories rather than individuals. In depersonalizing, people can say stuff they wouldn't say face to face. It's a bit sort of institutional. People in institutions do things that they wouldn't do personally because somehow the moral side is taken away. A gang or a group or institution can do things that individuals wouldn't do. You can say harsh things on the media because it's almost like this is a vehicle that you can say it in. And nasty, harsh things are quite common, especially when relationships go sour. There's a lot of stone throwing and wanting to hurt or to push or to provoke or to punish. And when you're not face to face, it's a lot easier. I was interested to see that 72% of relationships that end with a text. So it's easier just to tell your ex to go hopping, 75%, than to tell them face to face. Sorry, 82% end a relationship with a text. 75% say that social media actually affects romantic relationships negatively. That's people's experience. What actually happens when you're texting somebody? What communication happens, or what communication doesn't happen? You were just talking about verbal communication. 6% of communication is verbal. 35% is tone. And 58% is body language. Now, that shows just how limiting it is when you actually have only words at your disposal. But also the meaning that you put into a word is different, because when you haven't got the benefit of the tone and the language, body language, the meaning is much more bold. It's much more risky. If I say something and you actually read my body language with it, you're actually getting a bigger meaning around that word. When you just get a word and there's no extra additional communication or meaning transferred, especially when the person might be trying to throw a bit of a curved ball, because they might say something sarcastically, or they might say something to be funny, but it's not very funny, it's a bit sort of spiky. So communication actually becomes very thin, and you can almost read into it what you want, and so your own agenda starts to be actually more dominant in the communication than what's actually being said. It's interesting to have information passed, but the information doesn't always mean the same thing relationally to different people. So a relationship can get skewed when there actually isn't a relationship problem, but the information is actually being distorted. Remember that film Lost in Translation? We're almost talking different languages. And it's not the intent that's the problem, it's the actual language that hasn't got the adequate development. And so it's important to have alternative ways of connecting, because we can start building up a whole scenario around how we see it, and it can be totally misunderstood or misjudged by the other. Another problem that I think I'm finding increasingly developing is that people tend to only show what they want to show, and it's a very distorted picture. You show what you think you'd like people to see you as, what you want to present a certain picture. So because you're more, when you see somebody, if they're looking sick, they can't, you say, hey, what's wrong? You're looking, but here there's nothing. You've only got their communication. You've got their choice of image and of word. And so you've got nothing to go on apart from their idealized image. And then you start believing your own idealized images. You start living in that virtual world. And the world that is not there, you cut down on, or you hide more and more. So it contributes to the split self a lot more than if you're actually engaging face to face, if you're going out with your mates. And it's fine up to a point, but when you start feeling bad about yourself, you can easily despair, because others might put better photographs. We're in Bali, look at, we're having fun, wish you were here. And you think, oh, blow, here I'm sitting at my desk, and look, everybody else is having a fine time. Or look at this friend of mine with this hot chick, and here I am sitting by myself. It's like, it puts you into a worse space. And because you've got no recourse, you can't talk about it, you can't disengage the feeling. You're stuck with a feeling that now has been generated, because once a feeling is generated, you can't ungenerate it without processing it. Either explaining it with the person that's involved with the feeling, or going through a process yourself with that feeling. You just go to bed with a horrible feeling. And those feelings accumulate, and those feelings cause a lot of problems, because when the feelings aren't resolved, eventually they start to pull you down. They start to pull you into depression, into cynicism, into long-term chronic fatigue. It's almost like the feeling doesn't let go. It doesn't go, because the part of the process is that you've got to connect with the person and express the feeling in the interaction. If you cross with your friend, when you see them, and you got a long face, they say, what's wrong? Nothing, come on, what's wrong? Eventually you get it out and you have it out. And so there's a process. Whereas on the thing, if you've got a long face, So it causes a lot of more emotional jamming, if I can say. And with that comes the pressure that being on social media causes. I find it distressing that if you don't answer an email straight away, people make assumptions. I don't answer emails straight away. I answer them after 3 or 5 or 10 days. But then people have lost interest. I answer them, and then they don't answer back. And then I think, well, if I'd answered them in 1 hour, they would have answered me. But they've already made an assumption that I'm not interested. But actually, I'm not in the same sort of space. Firstly, I'm not in my office often, whereas they're sitting there and, they're just looking for distraction. So when an email comes in, oh good, something to look at, so they answer straight away. I send them an email, it comes straight back. I think, oh no, give me space, I don't want to, So and they take a lot more, I think it's offense or boredom than I actually intend, and I find it quite stressful, because then they're all these sitting emails and they're sitting judgments, and I really don't like it. But in terms of more connected social media, it puts us in a place of being on call all the time. You're never off the hook, and people who are close to you almost want to know and feel entitled to know where you are, what you're doing, who you're with, why you aren't there, why you are here, and so there's almost like a greater sense of looking over your shoulder, and when do you ever switch off? So how are we going to use social media creatively and appropriately while putting good boundaries on it? Because, our children are going to struggle, your children are going to struggle with it big time, because in a sense you've grown before it and you've come into it. So you almost know a life outside of it. If you don't know a life outside of it, then it becomes your life. And then it can destroy you. I mean, the number of kids who've already committed suicide because they've been bullied on social media. Stuff like that. The abuse that happens when kids start to gang up against each other and it goes viral. I mean, the damage is hectic. Well, new friendships are... I was going to look for that study, but I didn't have time. But that study that suggested that 10 years ago, or 2002 I think it was, that the average scholar or student in Harvard had 3 friends, and 10 years later it was down to 1.5 friends, real friends. And in 10 years, that kind of shift is quite dramatic. The nature of friendships is shifting to the point where people don't really have real connections. I mean, it's becoming quite desperate. I've got a book called Men and Friendships, and the guy did a lot of research in North America and in Europe, and he said, on the whole, men don't have friends anymore. They have lots and lots of acquaintances that they share all sorts of levels of stuff, work, sport, but they don't have deep friends where they can, speak to from their heart. So it's really concerning, because we're on such a momentous drive, and I don't want to sort of be harking after the past and say the good old days when we talked to each other. But one needs to understand or try and somehow manage it so that one's friendships are enabled. A lot of ADHD stuff comes from just too much technical stimulation and the brain getting hyped up so that it actually can't come down. And it's just unable to focus on one thing, because unless it's coming like this, it's boring. So you're either hyped or you're bored, and you can't actually manage it because now it's been distressed or shaped, under stress, so that you're addicted to chronic stress. I notice in people in relating, when they're stressed in the relationship, if there isn't stress, they start stressing it. And then they start upsetting and calling each other names, and then they feel like, now it's humming. But when it's calm, they get anxious. What's wrong? It's so quiet. They can't cope with steady, peaceful, relaxed relationships. And they're actually addicted to the chronic feelings of stress. Yeah, let's extend some of these if there are. I mean, how do you express affection? Can you? I think, on all these levels, I think social media leaves us cold, because actually what we need to see social media as a function. It's not a relationship. It enables the function. It's a bit like having a motor car. The car doesn't make your friendship better. You might be able to drive together. You might have a friendship with your car and not have your friendship with your friend. But ultimately, your friendship with your friend needs to be improved by the fact that you've got a car. And so function needs to enable the relationship to deepen. And so the challenge for social media is to actually create more of this, to develop the relational needs rather than to detract from them. And for instance, something that's, the problem with junk food is that it makes you feel like you've eaten when it actually hasn't nourished you. And what the popularity of social media is, it comes in as a virtual need fulfillment while not giving you the need. So it seems like it's connecting you. It seems like it's making you closer and available to the other, but actually it's not giving you the reality. And it's robbing the reality so that you actually don't realize what you're missing. You can get to the point where you're happy with a very shallow relationship because that's all you know. I mean, how much can you say to your friend while you're texting? It's like a half a relationship, and yet if that's what you choose, that's all you know. And because social media is easier, and because we tend to be avoiding the hard work of relating, maybe not so hard, but it is more work. So we tend to move to the instantaneous and the easy and and the gratifying, but actually we actually shortchange, we're diluting the relationships. We're creating for ourselves an emptiness. And I think we're going to find a lot more desperation around loneliness. Loneliness is already an increasing problem, where you don't have contact with people, any meaningful contact. And when you can't have contact with others, you don't have that contact with yourself. When you don't have that contact with yourself, you don't have that contact with God. So you suffer on every level, because relationships are normative. And that's why I said friendship is a non-functional connection with other. And too much social media is a functional connection. So it detracts from the relational need side. It prevents you sharing on an emotionally transformative level. It makes you feel connected, but you're disconnected. It makes you feel like you've said a lot of stuff, but they're empty words. Those same words, if you said them face to face, would have a profound effect. But because you're saying them on a tweet or on just a repeated thing, they come across empty. So words lose their meaning. Words actually, the meaning is lost. It decreases. A word said 20 years ago and a word said now doesn't have the same content. So the trouble is, when the words lose their meaning, then you have to use a stronger word or a more shocking concept. And then we start saying harsh things because we want to wake the person up, or we want to, you have to sort of almost like bring shock value into it to make them notice. Otherwise they discount it. So that it actually shapes the way the communication is drifting, and it tends to be drifting more violently. Because shocks tend to be more shocking. And so we say harsher things. We watching TV. I'm not going to tell them whether I feel like going out or not. It's almost like we almost like push it back with a bit of resentment, or a bit of not wanting to be taken for granted, or not wanting to be constantly monitored or compared. And so we tend to push back, and the pushing can be a bit more aggressive, passive aggressive. What we don't say, what we don't answer, and so relationships are being robbed of the nurturing element and increased in the conflictual elements. They're being pushed into comparisons, into pressures, into conformities. The conflicting side is increased, but the nurturing side is decreased, so that they aren't actually being sustained. And that's very troubling, because relationships become very much more fragile. And relationships become more thin, so that people are into the relationship and out much more quickly. And relationships become sexualized, become superficialized, like the group you're talking about. But there's no commitment, there's no tomorrow. It's almost like just have fun today and disappear. And so it allows for that, because it's almost like that's the way it's set up, because there are no consequences. Once you've switched off the phone or sent the message, it's gone, it's finished, it's over. It doesn't have the trail of responsibility to the other, responsibility to the other, so that you actually are able to disconnect more easily and with less guilt or empathy. And so it's eroding the relationships from the other side as well. And I think we have to take into account that evil is there, and evil is going to use whatever means it can to further its aim, and that is to push people into alienation. And I think social media is a very powerful vehicle that can push you into good connection. It's very powerful, but it has enormous dangers. My friend doesn't talk to his daughter. Every time he says we must talk, she says, "Text me, Dad, I'm busy." She doesn't say, "No, I don't want to talk." She says, "Text me." So he says, what must I do with, how can I talk to my daughter with text? If you get a long text like this, you don't read it anyway. But so 2 lines, what can you say? It's causing deep fragmentation. And however much you feel very closely connected with certain friends, those connections aren't deep. So when they collapse, they totally collapse. And that's also the sort of worrying thing. When you're unfriended, when you disconnected or downgraded or switch off because you're tired of this person saying, so you don't answer. Face to face, you couldn't not answer if they ask you a question. But like this, you just, oh, I'm busy, and you don't answer. And 2 days later, it's gone stale, so you don't answer it anyway. So, we're doing things which we wouldn't normally do, but we do them because now we have a medium which covers up for a whole lot of stuff.